Welcome to Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. Welcome.
And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and unfettered by supernatural beliefs or even correct pronunciation.
Okay. And on the program, we want to have discussion, and hopefully we can have call-in and make this dialogue, trialogue even.
There we go, trialogue, yes. And today's subject will be about anthropology. Anthropology. But before we begin, we want to tell viewers about the show's sponsors, the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Yeah, we have several regular meetings. See our website, rationalists.org, for details. The first third Sunday mornings of the month are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions, and the second Sunday is Skeptics Book Club. On the fourth Sunday, we mix it up, sometimes with potluck and get-together with members for reflection meetings.
All right, and the Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. The regular meetup is Tuesday nights, 5:30 p.m. approximately, at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria in the Old City. When you get to the meetup, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty at Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. So later in the show, we'll give you our websites and some additional details on the upcoming programs.
Okay, and in the Rationalists of East Tennessee, is that
you covered that.
I've done that. Yeah, okay, let's go program.
So you wanted to speak about anthropology.
Yeah.
And that's one of those multi-syllabic words.
Anthropos, this just means man or human.
All right, and the ology is?
The study of.
Study thereof, all right. So anthro is Greek?
Yeah, it's Greek,
All righty.
And so we get anthropomorphism, in other words.
Anthropomorphism means to be shaped like a man.
Yeah, in the form of a human, yeah.
In form, and so that might mean literally a physical shape, or it might mean that we cast ideas in the shape of human thoughts or something like that. So
we're trying to make a god into a human.
Or that sometimes we maybe infer intentions on inanimate objects.
Exactly, yeah. That's a good idea.
Anthropomorphizing.
Yeah, you do that in cartoons a lot.
Yeah. So Sam, I think we got a slide for anthropology and the meaning thereof. I went to an online dictionary and looked this up, and we have the following. Anthropology, a noun, the study of human societies and cultures and their development, the study of human biological and physiological characteristics and their evolution. And used as a noun, we also have physical anthropology. The plural noun would be physical anthropologies. All right, so they're telling us how to pluralize it.
Yeah.
So you taught at the university level. Did you ever teach a class that was called anthropology, or would it have been subjects on the syllabus?
Well, I taught philosophy of social sciences, and often I would invite anthropologists in to dialogue with me, and had very good colleagues.
All right.
And they would explain what anthropology was, and then how it relates to other sciences.
And I'll confess, I already forgotten. In which class would you have likely invited them in? What class were you teaching?
Well, that would have been in the philosophy of social and behavioral sciences.
Okay.
And that was good to have colleagues from different departments, You get free education that way.
All right. What went through my mind is, were you teaching classes about maybe, early Bible or something like that, and then bring in, anthropologists to talk about how to study other cultures to compare and contrast?
Yeah, I taught in 2 departments, actually, in the philosophy and religion studies program. And so you can have an anthropology of religion to show how religions develop in different cultures. And then you do a comparison. But the main thing for an anthropologist, and they're very insistent about this, and I like that attitude, is first of all, learn the other culture's way rather than imposing your own and start criticizing. First of all, you got to learn what these other cultures are saying and how they function.
All right.
And how the people use their views and their practices and relationships with each other.
I follow that, as well as I can understand how difficult that can be.
Oh, yeah.
In the context for me, it is that I developed an interest in ancient Egypt. It would have actually been in high school. We had a class called History of Western Civilization, and they spoke about Sumer and then ancient Egypt. Sumer is where history begins, but within 100 years there's also written history in ancient Egypt. And there is something about Egyptian artwork that is compelling.
Oh, yeah.
And I found it compelling, and
sure.
And it has remained so. But as a result, I've read more about ancient Egyptian culture than anything else in antiquity. And although I've read about ancient Rome and ancient Greece and ancient Sumer, I've read much more about ancient Egyptian. But yet I know that the next book I pick up, I will run into things that feel really alien.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that, I guess, as you said, the challenge of getting to study another culture is to first of all understand it on its own terms. And
that's why we call it a discipline, because it really is
yes,
to learn not only the language, if you can. I mean, that's essential for an anthropologist.
So for your students, how did you try to give them a taste of that? Did you ask them to put their heads into other contemporary cultures or into ancient cultures?
Well, you try to do both, but when you're studying an ancient culture, it's more difficult because you can't talk to them and get feedback except from what they wrote. So if they wrote things, then of course you studied it very carefully. And if you can't read the language itself, at least you got to have a good translator. But I had to study Greek and Hebrew, but even then it's still difficult because you don't get to talk to them in the times past to get questions.
Yeah, you can't resolve ambiguities in the text.
So you have to read their literature and their art and that sort of thing. And that's why it's called a discipline, is you have to put aside your own views sometimes so that you can get inside another viewpoint and not start making judgments. The main thing is to try to, when you meet somebody new, you don't try to impose your view onto them. You've got to learn. And that's why it is called a discipline. We all have to work hard at it.
All right. So in terms of contemporary cultures, did you try to, can you give examples of contemporary cultures, how you might compare and contrast?
Oh, well, in this country we have the Native Americans.
All right.
And
I'll confess I didn't think of that example myself, and yet it is the obvious one. Because
and then, of course, we have people moving in this country. That's one of the advantages of America, people coming from other cultures. And you get with them and learn from them. I met, when I was in another town, I met some Muslims, and I had to learn. I had read about Islam. That was part of my training, but I had to listen to contemporary, and that was a discipline on my part.
Yeah, I must admit, I put myself in the mode of thinking I would be traveling somewhere in order to do this, but you're right. Here in the United States, we don't have to travel far to encounter people with other cultures.
Now, what anthropologists do is often, if they can get the money for it, they go to another country or another tribe or group.
Maybe I can use that as my excuse for why I thought of that. But I've had the opportunity to travel to Mexico. It was work related.
Yeah, sure.
And I've attempted to learn a little bit of Espanol so that I could. It was nice to be able to read and understand billboards as I was being chauffeured.
Part of the culture,
Yes. Reading an adult newspaper was still challenging for me.
Well, we got a fellow we got a caller. Go ahead,
caller. Give us a name or a nickname, please.
Yes, this is Charles from Central Illinois.
Hello, remote embedded Central Illinois reporter Charles Cameron.
Speak up and loudly now.
What do you have to report for us?
Good.
Very good.
Now, on today's topic, however it's pronounced.
Anthropology.
Yeah. The interesting part is that when you look through various and sundry records throughout historical documentation, you will see a pattern emerging on how people view the divine. For instance, one of the oldest sections of the Old Testament had one of the ancestors of what would become Israel meeting his God on the road, recognizing him, sitting down and eating lunch with him, which means that his God was in the form and shape of a human being, probably male, and he recognized him. But later, when the rewrites were happening, and as Joe would point out, the different author groups, it was if you saw God, you had to die and be judged to either go to heaven or whatever. So throughout history, you see basically the same thing happening to the Greek gods, the Roman gods, and so forth. For instance, Poseidon was the god of the sea, but also of earthquakes.
Okay.
But his nature would change over time. So it seems as though that as societies evolved and changed and came in contact with other societies and so forth, they would incorporate and change and dilute elements of their society's religious beliefs.
Okay.
Well, you brought out two good points. One could be called historical anthropology in the sense that you see the historical development of cultures, how the changes take place and modifications come about in time. And then comparative anthropology is you have one culture located someplace in time and another culture another place in time, and you compare them and see how they develop and the similarities and the differences.
I would add one more thing, and that is potentially to look for how they may have interacted and shared ideas.
I like that, yes.
Developed ideas from one another.
And because that's part of anthropology, because cultures did interact with each other and tribes did.
So there is the flow of ideas.
Flow, I like that, yeah.
So Charles, as you were talking though about maybe how the roles of gods changed in time, in the case of the Greeks, there is something very, very different from, let's say, what Christianity is, and that is that at the time of the classical Greeks, they had this god set that they called the Olympians, Zeus being the chief. But Zeus had led the overthrow of a previous set of gods or deities, the Titans. And I think it was implied that the Titans were like the second set, and there was an even more primordial set whose name escapes me right now.
Yeah, I'm lost. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and that's a very different thing than is presented in Christianity, where there's this sort of idea of monotheism and
well, actually, the word Elohim in the Hebrew tradition
is plural.
So it now.
By the time the redactors and stuff were done making the Bible that we read now, that had been very downplayed.
Well, you have in the Hebrew Bible, "Let us make man."
Yeah, and so thus we then get the story that, oh, well, the plural is used to represent...
It's called plural of majesty. That's,
Yeah.
Also, some Christians are pointing out that it was actually not just God the Father, but it was God the Son and God the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I doubt if the Hebrew Bible... that's later on, centuries later.
That's right.
Yes, so
that would be...
religious concepts and ideals and understandings change.
Yeah, that's what later biblical scholars call that eisegesis rather than exegesis. Eisegesis is reading a text and reading into it a later meaning that it was not there originally.
Yes, revisionist. Well, but I would point out, though, that the overthrow of a previous deity set is very different than the attempt of Christians to back annotate the Hebrew traditions to suit their mission. They weren't trying to overthrow Yahweh. They're just trying to
absorb.
There we go, absorb.
And redefine.
Yeah.
In fact, the Christianity grew out of Hebrew tradition and the Hellenist or the Greek tradition. So the word, the theology, theos, is Greek.
It's a Greek word.
Greek word. So you have both, and the New Testament was written not in Hebrew but in Greek, because that was the language around the Mediterranean world. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The language of commerce.
Yeah, exactly.
Not just commerce, but also of the language of the upper class intellectuals, because they had the oldest standing group of information. The vast majority of the writings at the Library of Alexandria, for instance, was in Greek. So it wasn't just commerce, though commerce helped immensely.
That's a good point.
And that embedded many of the concepts and ideas embedded in the previous Greek culture, society, and religious beliefs into later religious beliefs.
Well,
for instance,
go on.
Sol Invictus,
right.
The sun imperishable.
I was going to say the sun undying, but okay.
Yeah. Was the primary god that Constantine the Great originally believed in. So when he ordered the Council of Nicaea, he looked over the result of the Council of Nicaea, so nothing that would cause problems amongst the various different religious groups that was without the Roman Empire, and wouldn't cause him to have, say, another civil war on his hands. The one he just finished was bloody enough, and which is how he wound up as emperor. Annotated it and says, yes, this is acceptable, and then went off to participate in a establishment of a major temple to Sol Invictus. So much of the concepts and ideas of the Sol Invictus would be incorporated unintentionally and probably unknowingly into the Christian concept of God.
Yeah, we have a word called cross-cultural, in which cultures come together and they share ideas and views and architecture and philosophies. And this is how cultures develop and expand.
If we're going to talk about the word culture, I'm going to ask Sam if he can find our slide defining culture. And let's talk about this. It says, the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. Example, the 20th century popular culture. They also write synonyms would be the arts, the humanities, intellectual achievements, literature, music, painting, philosophy, the performing arts. And then an example usage would be exposing their children to culture. Now, there is something that I think that this definition is very deficient in.
I agree. Well, you go ahead. Let's hear what you...
And I'm going to say very much culture is often tied up with specific language. And, you know, we living in the United States feel that, let's say, the British are much more accessible to us. They at times merely seem a little eccentric. They don't seem like as different as merely the French are. And it's because there is a linguistic barrier between us and the French, and us and the Germans, and us and the Scandinavians. So I really think they should have added something that at least made mention of the importance of language.
Oh, yeah, very definitely. Yeah. And also part of culture is the work that people do.
Okay, so you're going to add work.
Yeah, you know, you got farmers, and in our culture, and you know, modern times you got plumbers, and then in ancient times you had plumbers of different kinds.
Yeah.
But I mean, if they had dikes and everything, they had to deal with.
And you know, when I think about how you say that, the environment in which some cultures develop would reflect different ways of. I'm trying to avoid saying earning a living, but making a living.
Problem solving, yeah.
If you're agricultural, you're very sedentary. You're maybe building irrigation systems to control water. But if you're a nomadic herding group, that's going to be very different.
Yeah, and your language is going to be different in some respects. And then if you're in the shipping business, that's another.
Yeah. So somehow, Charles, we got on to culture.
Impacts for culture and society was the movable type printing press.
And makes a big difference.
The adoption of the Greco-Roman alphabet, whom they originally got from the Phoenicians, allowed the expression of concepts and ideas to be spread further and faster than ever before in history.
Yeah.
Much of the religious warfare, religious-based warfare and so forth in Europe from the 16th to the 17th centuries was because of the spreading of dissent and so forth from the Catholic Church's viewpoints on many things, made possible because they could print up, 5,000, 6,000 copies of these ideas and have them spread out faster than the Romans could, the Roman clergy could stop them.
So that's an interesting observation. So I guess to summarize it, that an explosion of a flow of information may have led to an explosion of violence. Yeah, we normally like to think that the flow of information is going to make, people more open to ideas and things like that. But here, that's maybe not the case in Europe.
Sometimes the overflow of information is accompanied by trying to put down another culture with your culture,
a competing one.
Rather than understanding. And
Yeah.
one of the advantages of anthropology is you try to understand another culture and try to show the similarities with another culture, in the sense that they're all trying to solve certain kinds of problems of survival and relationships with each other. And so you have a kind of almost an interdenominational anthropology in that respect, to see how they solve problems from one culture to another that are similar problems.
Well, I mentioned commerce.
Yeah.
And when I said that, I was thinking equally of not merely material commerce, but also commerce in ideas.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Very good point.
But I guess, well, to Charles's point, that in Europe, the rise of Protestantism was accompanied by a rise in violence against the old church. It went back and forth. Both parties used violence when they could.
Yeah. Well, translating the Bible itself was introducing a new language in many respects.
In 10th grade, that same Western civilization class in which I learned about the Sumerians and the Egyptians, I eventually learned about the Reformation and a concept that was surprising to me when I heard about it, and that was that the church tried to prevent the translation of the Bible into the local languages. The local languages were referred to as the Vulgate, as in vulgar.
Vulgar, yeah.
Which, the word vulgar has a connotation to us, meaning something distasteful. But I think...
Base and demeaning.
But I think in this sense it sort of merely meant
the people.
the language of the people, as opposed to, let's say, the holy language.
And that was a major revolution, so that the what was called divine revelation was not then transmitted through a priesthood.
It could be read directly.
And the Protestants came up with an interesting notion called the priesthood of believers. In other words, every believer is a priest. That is, he does his own interpreting. And they went, presumably, to church to hear other people's interpretations so that you could have interaction, cross-reference, and maybe correction.
All right. Well, that seems like a very charitable interpretation to give to that, Joe. I certainly learned about many times when, of course, the churches were attempting to establish mechanisms to enforce uniformity. The Catholic Church set up the Inquisition. The Protestant churches, though, they burnt heretics as well.
You had a tradition. It was the Baptists early, that was part of their tradition, was the priesthood of all believers.
All right.
And therefore, you could not use force. That was part of the Baptist tradition.
All right.
That was a major revolution, obviously. The Quakers, of course, were doing the same.
All right.
But that took time to develop. And some of the Baptists didn't learn it quick enough. But some of them learned very quickly.
So there's one other deficiency, I think, in this definition of culture, and that is I don't think it mentioned religion. We get a slide for the definition of religion we could get up? All right. So if the internet tells the truth, religion is defined as the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. Examples, ideas about the relationship between science and religion. Synonyms include faith, belief, worship, creed, and then something, I'm not sure what this means, more a particular system of faith and worship. I'm not sure.
But it just systematized. That's theology.
Yeah.
Theos, just the word for God.
So, and often what we'll see, I think, is that when we especially talk about ancient peoples, we'll often almost talk about a people's and their religion synonymously. That we talk about the ancient Egyptians, they have the language of the ancient Egyptians. They have a set of gods.
Yeah.
And they're almost something like they come in a bundle together. The ancient Sumerians have a different set of gods.
Oh, yeah.
And a different language.
I had the good fortune when I studied in a theology school to have a man who had been a missionary to India.
Okay.
And he's taught a course in world religions. And he was incredibly objective. Now, what I mean by objective, he was not proselytizing one religion from another. He simply got inside each religion to analyze it from its point of view.
From its point of view.
And it was a real education. When he got into Buddhism, he had two kinds of the Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhism.
All right. I'm learning here.
And one of them is atheistic, without a God, and the other is with theism. And here is a man teaching a course called World Religions, but it was basically an anthropology course. You get inside Buddhism, and you see the diversity and what kind of problems. And then you realize Buddhism has a lot of profound psychology in it. They were really working with the notion of having a compassionate society.
All right.
And that's why this professor, when he was studying in India, and he came back, he didn't sound like a missionary. He sounded like an anthropologist because his job was to learn as much from them as they were learning from him. And I think that's why this school of theology hired him. Now, some of the fundamentalists didn't like that, and they tried to get him fired.
Because it challenged their culture, their worldview.
Yeah, well, and his view was, well, I thought this was an education institution. And, of course, he was right. But these fundamentalists didn't understand that.
All right.
They thought it was an indoctrination.
Wanted to give an education that propped them up as the sole authority of all that is true, right, and just.
His view was...
They're showing that, hey, this is what these people believe, this is why these people believe it, this is how they believe it, and it matches in many respects from many of the things that we believe, but disagrees on a lot of things that we don't agree with, which was not in the best interest of the fundamentalists that wanted to dominate and control.
That's why he was such a great teacher. He said education is multiple indoctrination. You get indoctrinated in this view, from their point of view, and in this view, and another point of view. And it was really an education.
Well, if he was here, I'd have said that I think the word exposure, too, is
well,
better,
he was just using that as
but he was trying to...
a pun.
In a sense, he was trying to challenge their view of what they were doing.
Exactly.
And
he was starting
using the words in a jarring fashion.
Yeah.
It provokes that, yes.
And this
now, one of the factors we should look at is where and how societies went from migrating tribal, Paleolithic, to the Neolithic, and where these things happened. The most important factor was a reliable water supply. So major ancient societies were all primarily founded on or around rivers. The Yellow River, the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. The Po. When the Greeks were founded, they were using many of the small streams that from the snow mountains, so forth, from the mountains of interior Greece. So they didn't get one big society. They got multiple small city-states.
So the geography actually affects the development of their culture. Greece is mountainous, so you'd have small streams, small springs all over.
They had ships; they could go across the Mediterranean.
But Sumer grew up all along the banks of major, large, slow-moving rivers. Same as for ancient Egypt.
Transportation.
They did provide the water did provide that as well. I sometimes wonder if we could see the ancient shoreline of the late ice ages, if we would see humans involved in coastal fisheries and things like that, but that they're all underwater now after the end of the ice ages has brought the ocean levels up. I know for sure that the English Channel is comparatively shallow. I don't actually know the numbers, but people have been recovering human artifacts from the bottom of the English Channel for a long time, things that get caught in anchors or in nets, because there's human settlements down there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, the area you're talking about is where the channel is, and that area has an average depth in places of 22 feet. So when the Ice Age was locked up, there was a land bridge between Germany.
England was not an island; it was a peninsula.
Yeah.
So you had transport of goods and ideas and music and art.
Well, it was, if we're talking about where the English Channel is, it was dry land. It would have been, I assumed it was, in fact, probably farmed as well.
Yeah.
One of the most fascinating parts of human anthropology is studying different ideas and concepts of art and music.
Yeah.
Some songs in Europe, their concepts and ideas, especially the common folk people, would be banned in some parts of the rest of the world for being anti-establishment or vulgar and obscene. In fact, there's been a large attempt to censor what is and isn't acceptable, even here in the United States. I'm thinking of the Dixie Chicks and how they got themselves banned from basically every country western station in the U.S.
Well,
we all personally filter.
We pick and choose the content we want. But, that's part of the struggle over school curricula that goes on. People, there are elements that want to downplay things about our past that, the treatment of, the displacement and theft of Native American lands. Well, in fact, it's appropriate to say the genocide of Native Americans in North America. The nature of causes of the American Civil War. I'm just amazed that that's in dispute. Anyone who's ever read the documents of succession of the 4 of the 7 founding states of the Confederate States of America can have no doubt that it was about slavery, and from the first day till the last. And
one of the books I've just recently put on my Kindle is The Confederates and the Neo-Confederates by James Lowell, who deals with that subject and how it's been misrepresented since like the 1890s.
I didn't hear what he said. What did he say?
Charles, you're asserting that since the 1890s there's been an attempt to rewrite the nature of the Civil War.
Yes.
Both the cause and...
Well, I think what you could say is all histories are written from a point of view. And what you try to do is you try to get as many viewpoints as you can. Now, that doesn't mean that one viewpoint is truer than the others. You have to critically evaluate and do comparative analysis and look for consistencies.
So I was going to say, I need to contest what you just said.
Go ahead.
You said that doesn't mean that one is truer than the other. I think the answer is that I would express it the following way.
Go ahead.
That not every conjecture put forward is should be accepted uncritically. They should all be examined, and we make advances when we discard bad ideas.
Sure.
Bad ideas should die.
One of the things that Mr. Lowell does in his book, Confederates and the Neo-Confederates, is that he pulls up the original documentation of the Articles of Succession.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you're referring to the same ones that I am.
Right, and then he exposed at a conference the documentation from the what was it? Convention, North Carolina Convention, to them, and they were all stunned because the North Carolina Convention was condemning the states of Vermont, New Hampshire, Illinois, New York, and so forth for expressing their states' rights to disregard what the North Carolinas and the other intense slave-owning states wanted, because they were expressing their states' rights.
Okay, translate what he's saying, what you think he's saying.
Well, I was going to, I think I understand what Charles is saying, but I don't think it helps the conversation to really talk about states' rights the way I think you're trying to use it. There's an argument that goes like this. After the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court said that Dred Scott was not a free man, even though as a slave he was taken to New York, then a free state, he was still someone else's property. And what the result of that was that Southern slave owners could take their slaves and work them in every state of the nation.
Every state. They were property in that sense.
They were property, and therefore slave labor could compete against free labor in every state of the nation. There was no free state.
Exactly.
So the argument goes that certainly this fueled abolitionist sentiments. And the argument goes that if we want to talk about somehow states' rights being the cause of the Civil War, it would be the right of northern states to exclude slave labor from their territory. Now, that's the way the argument is put.
Presented.
I think that's a bad way to talk about it because, frankly, because the people who misrepresent the cause of the Civil War often are simply not sophisticated enough to understand that you've just one-upped them. I have a dim view of that. I prefer to say that there is a moral imperative that many people felt, perhaps not all, but certainly some people in the 1860s had every bit as modern a moral imperative to say we must stomp out slavery in our nation. And they made common cause with people who maybe said, well, we don't want to compete against slave labor. And the net result was a civil war that at the end of it, the seceding states were subjugated. The Constitution was rewritten to include the 13th Amendment, barring slavery. And so when people say that somehow that the Civil War was not about slavery, I tend to want to say, well, at the end of the Civil War, there were 3 amendments to the Constitution. What were they about?
Oh, no, that would be ridiculous to say it didn't have anything to do with slavery. It was a complex war, but it's certainly part of the complexity. A major part of it is the slavery issue.
I must say, it's the only issue. It's the only issue that caused secession.
Well, no, I think you're right.
It was the principal one, according to all the declarations of succession, according to the documentation.
And it was the only named reason in any of the documents of succession.
And all the documents.
Only named reason.
Yeah.
Okay,
hey, Charles,
I'll let you go.
We should clear the line for some other callers.
Thanks again, Charles.
All right, we'll talk to you another time.
Mm-hmm.
Bye. We should do the mid-program break, Joe.
Okay.
Somewhere here in our papers, probably second from the last.
Go ahead. What page are we on?
Here, I'll grab this line.
Okay.
Nope, that's the end of the show. We got to back up.
Okay.
All right. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions.
Okay, we've moved. We have a new regular time every Wednesday, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Knoxville Community Television, and that's channels 6, 12, 99, and 193. That depends on your local television or cable network. So if you would, tell your out-of-town friends to see us streamline online, CTV Knox, KNOX.org.
Today's show is live. It is September 26th, I believe, 2018. And you can call the number on the screen while we play a couple of short videos about our sponsors. Make it so.
Live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else? Well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
Society of Knoxville, or ASK, we call it, meets one or more times a week. We have evening meetings of fun and fellowship and so forth, and that includes a conversation too, I guess. Find us as KnoxvilleAtheist.org. The purpose of ASK, that's ASK, is to supply a venue of community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and like-minded persons in East Tennessee. Next Tuesday meeting is 5:30 p.m. And when is that?
It's 5:30, and it will be at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria. We've been moving, and so our script is actually wrong.
Okay.
All righty. So the Rationalists of East Tennessee will have their next events in October. On the 7th, we're going to have a program about how we produce this television show.
Good.
I've been meaning to ask you, will you come and help me explain to our membership how we produce the show?
Okay.
All right, you're on.
And the RET Skeptics Book Club meets the second Sunday of the month.
All righty. And for October, the subject is going to be the religion for atheists, and it's by an Alan Botham, and I'm not sure what kind of a pitch this Alan's going to make to us.
Well, the word religion has different meanings.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Also, on October 13th, that's a Saturday, and it's traditionally the Saturday before book club.
Uh-huh.
The Saturday before the Sunday book club.
It's Alcoa Highway.
We're going to do an Adopt a Highway pickup.
Adopt a Highway, okay.
So you can look at our website, rationalists.org, to find the schedule there, and there'll be exact times and locations, how to find the room in which we meet, how to find us in case you want to help with the Adopt a Highway pickup. And I think we covered it. That's the upcoming program or activities for October.
Okay.
So we got less than 10 minutes now. If you want to talk to us about anthropology, the study of humans and cultures, give us a call on the number on the screen. And I guess we had a few more things we can discuss. I've mentioned.
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize that in doing anthropology, you have what's called an internal criticism and external criticism.
Hey, we got
a call. Come in. Go
Hello,
ahead.
this is Freethought Forum. Can you give us a name or a nickname?
Caller?
Hello, caller.
Make it loud.
Yes.
Speak up and give us your comment or question, caller.
Your subject being, did humans create God in their own image? And it seems like it's less of a question about whether God was created in humans' image so much as does God's opinions continue to change with our opinions. And in the examples you've been talking about have been all from antiquity, and while that might be very important to those people who lived back then, it matters very little to me today. But as far as God changing his opinion to meet different things, it seems like we might ask, did humans create God, or does humans make God's opinions change in order to control the population? And in all of the examples, or I think virtually all of the examples that you were giving earlier, it was the way to control the population, the way that the Catholic Church subverted control of the population away from the Romans with their, well, as Charles said, printed up things.
Yeah.
But as in today, which I'm more concerned with than the ancient Romans, and I'm seeing it happening. For example, let's take abortion, which tends to be a very Republican issue. As of 1980 or so, the Republican Party had no concern about abortion until they started finding that it was a good way to rally people. And they went stronger and stronger and stronger on anti-abortion. And we see this today with Kavanaugh. The big question, is he going to be anti-abortion? And, of course, he says when he was in college, he went to church every day. But the Southern Baptist Convention, their position on abortion has gotten more and more and more strict since the first resolution back in 1973, I believe it was.
Yeah, several years ago.
And whereas 73, it was made legal. So it seems like the Republicans are using, Protestants have now gotten a aversion to abortion, whereas they did not have it prior to 1980.
You got a good point. I think what's happened,
had the main problem with abortion.
This is why religions often divide from each other into subgroups, is because they
get cut off.
Joe is responding to you, caller.
Religions develop because you have people in them, and they have views too.
Yes, I did.
And so they have to speak up their views.
So We're sorry about that, caller. We were hearing you, and assuming you've turned your audio back on, you'll be hearing us. Joe is responding to your question.
Yeah, looking at it from the various religions' point of view, you can't just say religion and they all think one way. Religions have great diversity in them. And sometimes you have great disagreements among religious people just on the abortion issue.
And that could be because they have different, maybe charismatic leaders who come down on different sides because they think they can get a following. Well, or they genuinely believe it, and or then they get a following.
Yeah.
And
then you have, I mentioned the priesthood of believers says that finally the individual has to make up his mind, not the preacher. Now the preacher is selected by the people, and they listen to him, but he also has to listen to them.
So I was going to say to caller, there are elements where, of course, religion will try to control, but there are certainly going to be elements where religion must reflect its population.
Is a good way,
as well.
Yeah. It's interactive.
And so there will be dynamic flow of both ideas and control both ways. An unpopular preacher has to go back to work for a living as opposed to living off of alms, so he kind of has to follow, but of course he tries to point his flock in a particular direction. And there's nothing quite like making a scapegoat to perhaps enhance your coffers.
Yeah, we all do that sometimes.
Perhaps.
Yeah, you can do that whatever group you're in if you're not careful. But what we've been trying to point out is the first thing in anthropology is you have to try to understand the other viewpoint. Otherwise, you're not disagreeing because you don't know what the other viewpoint is.
How should we say? Opinions expressed out of ignorance are not worth the air that they're spoken on.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. And we've all done that, unfortunately.
I may have. I'll confess, I actually find ancient Egypt so fascinating that I have not studied extant cultures. There's no living culture that I have studied to the same extent that I've studied ancient Egypt.
Well, that's understandable. It's such a fascinating culture.
I guess the closest I would come is I've learned some Russian, I've learned some Mexican and visited Mexico.
Yeah.
There were elements there that were interestingly different.
Sure.
In particular, there's a greater surviving amount of Native American culture, I think, in Mexico than here in the United States. Here in the United States, we were pretty thorough at exterminating Native American culture.
Yes.
We have place names, and that's about it.
That's about it. That's a good way to put it.
I think it was Mark Twain who advised travel, and he said that travel is deadly to prejudice. And I'll second that and suggest that we should all visit other cultures, and we can even do that using the internet these days without having to make physical travel. But Joe, we're down to a minute left, and so we need to start doing the wrap up here.
Okay, let's
do the last page. It's about time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
And you can get us on feedback by email at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com, and that's on Facebook, Freethought Forum, Knoxville.
You and your friends can see this show on most Wednesdays from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, anywhere the internet reaches at ctvknox.org.
And we want to thank Sam and you, Faithless.
All right, and you, Joe.
for those who are doing the technical support.
And our callers.
And the CTV Knox.
Nuns, those who identify with no religion, are the fastest growing religious group in America. If you don't believe in God here in East Tennessee, you're
not.